lecture will focus on the Second New Deal, or the Second 100 Days. Though the second 100 days would be the time period of 1936, this lecture will go all the way till 1939, or the end of the New Deal before World War II. Let's start with the election of 1936. Now, the Second New Deal was focusing on giving more aid to farmers and workers, but before the Second New Deal could start, FDR needed to take his second term in office. So with the election of 1936, he'll go up against Alfred Landon, the governor of Kansas. Now, FDR was the hero of workers, blacks, and farmers, all who believed that the New Deal was working for them. And so FDR will win by one of the largest electoral victories in American history. As you can see, Alfred Landon will only receive 8 electoral votes from Vermont and Maine. One of the biggest programs that came from the Second New Deal is the Works Progress Administration. It was in place from 1935 to 1943 and spent $11 billion to employ more than 8 million workers. The WPA built airports, miles of road, and a lot of public buildings. But one of the biggest programs that came from the WPA was the Federal Arts Project, which employed many professional artists to continue to create their art. One of the things was that every federal building and a lot of state buildings would receive murals and other artwork by these federal artists. One example there is George Biddle, who was a muralist who created a number of murals in the United States or DC government. And one example is the tenements, which is in the Department of Interior. And that mural is right here. Another major program that still exists today is Social Security. Created in 1935, it had 3 major parts. The first one, introduced by Dr. Francis Townsend, would be old age insurance for retirees 65 or older and their spouses. It's a supplemental retirement plan. Half of it comes from the worker and half comes from the employer. Now remember, or if you don't know, Social Security is not a bank that you build into. If you are paying Social Security today, someone else is benefiting from that. And the hope is that when you retire, someone will be paying Social Security for you. It's also supplemental. No one was supposed to retire just on Social Security. Everyone should be creating their own retirement plan because it's not enough for someone to retire on. There was also an unemployment compensation system. Funded by taxpayers and administered at the state level, it provided some compensation for those who were unemployed for a short period of time. It also gave aid to families with dependent children and to the disabled. This is funded by the federal government and available to the states. So, one example is if there is a parent who becomes deceased, the dependent children will receive Social Security from that parent until they turn 18. It's a way to help supplement families who may have lost a relative or a loved one. The Rural Electrification Administration is going to help out farmers. It's going to loan money to utility companies to bring power lines to rural areas. At the beginning of the Great Depression, only 10% of farms had electricity. A lot of utility companies didn't find it beneficial to take power lines out to those extreme rural areas. But through the Rural Electrification Administration, by 1950, 80% of farms had electricity. Farmers were also helped by price supports or subsidies. These would keep prices stabilized and limited production. We will actually pay farmers to produce less. This is only going to help farm owners, not laborers. Another major piece of legislation from the Second New Deal was the Wagner Act. This protected the rights of workers to join unions and bargain collectively. It also prohibited threatening of workers, firing union members, and interfering with union organizing. A way to make sure that this was happening was the National Labor Relations Board, which existed to hear testimony about unfair practices and hold elections to find out if workers wanted union representation. There was also the Fair Labor Standards Act, which set maximum work hours to 44 hours per week and minimum wage, which at that time was 25 cents an hour. Workers are going to organize under the Wagner Act. The Congress of Industrial Organizations, or the CIO, is going to be organized by John L. Lewis of the United Mine Workers. When he looked at the AFL, he felt that it did not represent those who were more ethnically diverse or those who were lower paid, and he felt that industrial workers deserved to be represented by an overarching union. One union that formed under the CIO was the United Automobile Workers. And in 1936, they actually performed a sit-down strike. A picture of them sitting down to strike is right there. Workers refused to work, but also refused to leave until a settlement was reached. It's a very interesting strategy. The owners tried to have them removed, and they simply said they weren't going to leave. It lasted 44 days until General Motors recognized the union. By 1940, twice as many workers will belong to unions than as that of in 1930. And this is a major part of why unions are an important part of the United States economic system. The next lecture will be focusing on the effects of the New Deal and some of the culture that will emerge as part of it.